first speaker is our new friend, Bradale Randolph. He's the founder and CEO of the 1854 Cycling Company. Come on up, Bradale.
All right. Thank you. My name is Bradale Randolph. I'm the founder and CEO of the 1854 Cycling Company. And when I tell people that I'm a manufacturer of e-bikes, they immediately think that I'm a cyclist or some kind of cycle enthusiast person. I'm not. My journey actually doesn't start when the company started. It started probably in 2008. At this point in this picture, I was working at a hedge fund. I was trading commodities for a hedge fund, and during the financial crisis, particularly during the Bernie Madoff sell-off, is when my company went kaput. Like the company I was working for actually went down, and so I had to find something else to do with my life. My landlord actually advised me to go and see if you wanted to be a college professor for business schools. So I thought about that. I went to Chicago, looked it up, saw a bunch of opportunities there, but I also saw a very beautiful woman who's going to be on the board of directors at Lever, who's now my wife. And so I followed her to Lubbock, Texas. And in Lubbock, Texas, there's not really a commodities brokerage or a hedge fund situation for me to work at. So I ended up working at Home Depot. And one morning, while I was going to do opening at Home Depot, I stopped by McDonald's. And while I was at this McDonald's, there was a gentleman that was outside asking for spare change. And as I was walking in, there was another gentleman that came out, and he took a breakfast sandwich out of his bag, and he threw it at the young man and said, I was going to give you money, but you're going to use it for drugs or whatever. And I saw this, and he and I had words, and he got in this pickup truck with the Jesus fish, and he drove off. So when I came out and gave him cash, I stopped and I asked, well, why do you need the cash? He says, well, I'm a college student. I just need a bus fare to get back across town. And it started to run through my brain about how we waste so much money on poverty because we don't ever stop to ask poor people what they need. And you'll see it this holiday season when we started giving out turkeys to people and never assume that they even have an oven to cook it in. You'll see it. And so I started thinking about this in so many different ways, and I went back to my childhood. This is where I grew up in Louisiana. Not that trailer on this side, but in that little, one of those dark houses over there on the right. And I thought about what I can do to help break the cycle of generational poverty. So I went back to my training as a broker, and this is when you look at different metrics to figure out if the market's going to go up or down. So I created this algorithm, which I took 30 different sets of data to find and pinpoint the demographics who are struggling with poverty underneath the radar that we don't see. And when I ran this for Lubbock, Texas County, I came up with Lubbock County in Texas, I came up with 3 different demographics. One was children who are being emancipated from foster care. The second were people who are what they call chronically unemployed. This wasn't long-term, it wasn't unemployed, it's just you can't keep a form of employment for longer than 90 days. And then there was another group, which was the incarcerated, and the recidivism rate in Lubbock County was very high at the time because I didn't know it then, but when in Lubbock County you had restitution to pay. So imagine someone being poor and going to jail for a DUI or something like unpaid child support or parking tickets or speeding tickets, and then having to pay for every single day they spend in incarceration. So every 3-4 months, you're going back into prisons because that's a cycle. And then you can't get a driver's license and things like that. So I created a nonprofit in Lubbock, Texas to actually go and help these populations. For the children who are being emancipated, we taught life skills, how to handle the funds that you're going to be receiving from the state so you can know how to pay your rent, cook, and buy groceries because no one's ever taught these kids to do that. We taught people who are chronically unemployed how to pass the 90-day window. Like when you get to an actual place of employment, here's what you have to do. Don't follow the crowd because they're already employed. But you're going to be one of 5, you're going to be 5 out of 20 people are going to be retained, so you have to do things a little bit differently. But I actually went to the pod in prisons, and we taught bootstrapping. For those who don't know what bootstrapping is, it's a business process in which you take the resources that you have available and you create a business with those. And we got some great success stories coming out of there. But that was my nonprofit, Project Poverty. We did that. And so the beautiful woman got a job as a professor. She's tenure track professor over at Babson. And we moved to Framingham. So I ran the same data for Framingham, Massachusetts, as I did in Lubbock with the algorithm and things like that. And I came up with another demographic, which was a little bit starting for me. This demographic, in particular, their median income was only $11,500 per year. They represented 51% of the heads of household who earned twice beneath the poverty threshold. And then 80% were mothers. Women who are formerly incarcerated are, in this state and in this country, some of the people who need our help the most. Even though they have lower recidivism rates than men, they're more likely to be sentenced to lifetimes of poverty. And when you have a child growing up in these situations, they're 71% more likely to drop out of high school at 16, simply because their mother was incarcerated. So my first thought was, okay, how do I do something that helps them? And I remember going through nonprofit, and I'm like, okay, I can't just go through a seminar workforce thing, hand them a certificate at the end, and hey, you're good, you're on your way. I didn't want to do that again. I want to be on the other side of that, to actually be the guy that issues the paychecks. So the first iteration of the 1854 Cycling Company was to train these women to service bicycles. Because the thought process there was, there's a need for bicycle mechanics, and in 2016, the income was $16 an hour, which was more than living wage. So we were like, okay, if we train them, we can send them out to the bike shops around the country and do this and that. We got popular, the bike shops didn't like it. So we had to create our own brand of bicycles. So we started building our own brand of bicycles. And this is when the 1854 Cycling Company took off. We were featured in Bloomberg magazine and a lot of other places. We sold bikes around the world. It was really a really good situation for us. But 2019 started to happen. This is when those parts for those bicycles ballooned up almost 75% over 2 months. So the idea of us paying living wages to our employees started becoming more and more of a memory. So we had to find another market in which we were to do this, to support this. So therefore, we started thinking about how we can get into this market, and luckily we got into Mass Challenge. So we were the class of 2018 in Mass Challenge, and they partnered us with Draper Technologies. So they're way smarter than I am. And so they said, okay, rather than just write police on the side of these bikes, go ask police what they want. So we conducted a bunch of observations and interviews, and we learned a lot. But what we learned the most was that police rely way too much on walkie-talkies when they're on bikes. This is how they communicate with dispatches, how they issue your ticket. This is how they even talk to people who speak foreign languages during the Boston Marathon. They need better ways to communicate. So what we did was we found a way to add a communications console to a high-speed e-bike. It was a cloud-connected console to the e-bike. And we did that. We took it to a trade show, one of the largest trade shows in the world, and it took off. So that's the prototype that we did. But this was late 2019. Then 2020 hits. For a lot of people in this realm, 2020 was about COVID and those things, but for someone like me, it was about George Floyd. And so what happened with us, we'd already sank a lot of money into this technology, but now we've become known as a Black-owned brand that's making a police bike, and we were in this situation now. So we had to figure out what it is we were going to do. But for me, it hit home. It brought me back to a place, because what most people don't know is that this is my younger brother, Braylon. It was just us. He, myself, and my mom. But in 2005, he was killed by the Los Angeles Police Department. So I started thinking, what am I doing? Why am I creating another weapon to go into these communities and give to this? So we thought about it, and we thought, how can we not throw this away, but bring it to communities in a way that actually enhance it. So we shifted a little bit to create a bike more for first responders. So what this bike does now, as opposed to what it was going to do when we first started, is it connects all agencies together. What we want to use this bike to do is to monitor mental health, to aid fire and search and rescue, to do all those little things that we were thinking about later on, but then give this web-connected e-bike to the general public and make it for the general public and not just for law enforcement and those things. And the beautiful thing about it all was we got to add a drone. We added a UAV to help do search and rescue. We're working with the Air Force and Binghamton University, and we had a successful demo out in Wareham. But most importantly, what we've done over the last year and a half is we've had time. Because the bikes we were making before, we were getting parts from Taiwan, we were getting parts from China and those things, and we know what supply chain issues we're having now. And those things, I honestly believe, are going to become a norm for the next 4 or 5 years. So what we did was we went back, once again, spent some more money, and we developed our own bicycle. This is going to be the bicycle we manufacture out of complete US domestic parts. This is a rendering. I couldn't really show the one that we were doing for real, but this is just a rendering of the bike we're making, and it's named the Bowditch, and we'll talk about that during the Q&A. But the whole point is to go back to the mission, and that is to use what we know now in terms of robotics to create microfactories to make these things. Because now where the women were starting out as people who are simply repairing bikes, fixing your chain, fixing your flat, now we're talking about programming. Now we're talking about CAD. Now we're talking about additive manufacturing. Now we're talking about building ecosystems to where people who say there's no labor force in the US can look for a trained and skilled, ready, willing, and able labor force that we're taking and we're making and creating out of people who've been utterly discarded. This is why I do what I do. Because if we can break this chain of poverty, we can break the cycle of poverty in at least one woman's life, think of how it affects their children and then their children's children. If we can do this well, then we can change like a lot of things, but not only that, we can show that such is possible. And I thank you all for the opportunity for me to speak today, and I'm sure I left out a lot, so please feel free to ask me any questions you may have on the company. Thank you. I'll take the mic. Yes, sir.
Can you tell us more about the naming of that bicycle?
Which one, the Bowditch or? Oh, so Lord Bowditch was a man who actually created, he was a lawyer during the abolitions there in 1854, who created the anti-slave catching, the anti-slave catching organization, which was an organization that fought against men who would come to Massachusetts just to take freed blacks back into slavery. So he's the guy that stood in the way. So he was kind of the semi-justice of the justice there, and so we named it the Bowditch years before we had an idea what it could be. So, other questions? Yes, Mike. Oh, I can give you my mic. Oh, well, I can't.
I was talking to my local bike shop about e-bikes because he sells them, services them. Is there an issue with your e-bike versus other ones for like local bike shops for selling or servicing? Because I know it's like Tesla versus
yes,
Chrysler
because
versus Mazda,
well,
that stuff.
this is some trade secret stuff. I'll go ahead and tell you that. Our bike is going to feature an electromagnetic motor, so we're not using the Bros or the Bosch motor and those kind of things because, once again, supply chain. We've partnered with people out in MIT to create our own motor, so we're going to have to be the ones to service our own bicycle and do that. But we will use standard size parts, but we kind of want to create our own little circle moat there because we want to create something that can't be duplicated on Amazon, or we can't send it to Taiwan. And I think that that's the way we can become a global competitor. We learn, we build, we innovate, we can do that. So, yes.
What's the cycle
Hello.
time?
Go. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. I didn't know if you want to wait. Thank you. What's the cycle time for the production of one of your bikes, and how many are you producing annually?
It depends. Well, first of all, the facility is not here yet. It's not here yet. But if we have additive manufacturing, we have proper funding, we can get probably 300 bikes done per month. You know, but that's with a stable supply chain. That's with adequate funding. That's with additive manufacturing, and that's with a team of probably 30 employees. We can get it done. Yes.
I just want to say I think it's incredible you've identified a passion, which is ending poverty through the manufacturing of bikes. What would you say to somebody, like, what would you say to somebody to have that type of situational awareness where you're walking out of McDonald's, you see a chance encounter, and that sort of alters your career path?
Well, two things. One, that is on a TED Talk, by the way, called Stop Throwing Breakfast Sandwiches at the Poor. So you can watch it entirely, get some more details. But one of the things about passion is if you can think about it and it moves you, because there's something in your soul that makes you feel that it's worth doing even if there were no money. It's kind of like, if there were no money involved, would you do this anyway? That is your passion. Like, you see people who do Clean Energy Act, climate change, and those things. Would they still clean that lake if there's no money and no cameras, no fashion? They would still do it. For me, I would always try to help those who are less fortunate. You know, try and break the cycle of poverty, because it just bothers me that a child somewhere has no food or could potentially have no coat in the wintertime. It just doesn't sit well with me after growing up in it. And so I kind of want to help that. But find that thing that you would do for free if possible. And that's the problem you solve. And everything that you do would come through that passion. And it'll be the reason why you persevere, why you don't shudder, why you don't quit, even when things get difficult, you know. And I would say find that, and then it'll echo through everything else. So, Angela? Oh.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about the impact that this had on the women who are able to employ?
Yes. So for our first probably 20 employees or so, all of them are currently in jobs where they make at least $20 an hour. They're all earning a living wage. So when we had to shutter and put them in other places to employ, no employer is paying them less than what we were paying them. So the impact on their living wage actually increased, and their skills increased. But the other beautiful thing is, I don't think we've had any go back to prison. And I think, but the one statistic I want to keep when we reopen the facility is the impact on their children. I want to know that their grades improved. I want to see how many are going to go to college, because, I mean, that's another statistic I didn't bring out. The number of children, the likelihood of a child who has parents who are incarcerated to actually go to a 4-year university is only like 7 or 8%. It's really low. So if we can send more kids to 4-year universities, colleges, I mean, I'll even take community college at this point, military or other acts, post-high school, post-secondary, I would consider that a win as well, because that's when we know we've completely changed the dynamic of the trajectory of the cycle of poverty, of generational poverty. So, any other questions? Oh, Ms. Nielsen? Oh.
I'm curious about your name, 1854, and your logo. Could you explain that?
Yes. The name 1854, because I'm sort of a closet history buff. I don't think you, that's how I knew Bowditch. But in 1854, we elected our third worst president, Franklin Pierce, and he brought back the Fugitive Slave Act, which meant that freed blacks who lived in Massachusetts, which had abolished slavery in 1826, could be tried, convicted, and brought back into slavery. That happened in 1854 in Boston, and the young man was found, and as they walked him to Virginia, they had to form a militia, which parted the streets to walk him from there to the coast and put him on a boat back to Virginia, and that militia later became the Boston PD. But in Framingham, where we are, on the 4th of July is when a bunch of abolitionists got together and they protested the hypocrisy of celebrating Independence Day while black people lived in fear of being re-enslaved. And one gentleman in particular, William Lloyd Garrison, burned the U.S. Constitution. And that started off the abolitionist movement, but that was like Colin Kaepernick kneeling in 1854. It kind of divided between pro and anti. And so I liken it to what we were trying to do, which is stand in the way of people going back into prison, which through the 13th Amendment is still a form of slavery. So I think that we need more abolitionists, people who are going to stand in the way of people going back into prison. And so as a symbol of that, we named ourselves 1854. And the symbol you saw was kind of a thing where we're breaking the chain of slavery, breaking the cycle of generational poverty, that kind of thing. And so, in it, kind of a partial link that links us together as well. So, thank you. All right, do I have much more time, or any more questions, or? Hopefully it did well. All right, thank you.